Hello, everyone. Good day to all of you from wherever you are connecting to our webinar. My name is Letícia Ribeiro, and I'm an employment law partner at Trent Rossi Watanabe, based in São Paulo, Brazil. We have an amazing session with very dynamic presenters who we are really fortunate to have with us today. I would like to welcome you to our panel, where we will be discussing about mental health and burnout cases in Latin America, as we all try to adjust to this new way of working. Burnout in the workplace has become more widely debated after COVID-19. It has also been officially classified as an occupational phenomenon by the World Health Organization in its latest revision of the International Classification of Diseases. This changing definition is expected to help bring an increased awareness of the issue and allow better access to treatment. We all know that workers can suffer from information overload, becoming unable to digitally disconnect from their work. Technology has also played a significant role in the rise of burnout lately. We have also seen a great evolution in the management of mental health and well-being in the workplace, especially in recent years, with the shift to remote and hybrid working. The increase of focus on well-being by large corporations has opened up the extremely important and necessary conversation about mental health in the workplace. It has taken the discussions to levels not achieved before. Across Latin America, we are seeing a wide range of developments, from local statutes to more updated case law. And while this movement from the World Health Organization is very important in the development of a mental well-being mindset in the workplace, certain local actions are still necessary for employees to be able to go on sick leave, whether paid by their employer or by the local social security institutes. It's important to be clear that the fact that burnout is now viewed as an occupational phenomenon by the World Health Organization does not automatically trigger employment benefits and entitlements. Today, we want to take a deep dive in this discussion and talk in more detail about legal, medical, and practical aspects of this subject matter, all in an effort to identify what are the factors that can contribute to burnout and how can employers mitigate those risks. If we could move to the next slide, please. I'm happy to share this space today with my longtime friend from Baker McKenzie in Venezuela, Carlos Felsi. Carlos?
Thank you so much, Leticia. Yes, I'm thrilled to share this space with you, with Laura, Juliana, and all the attendees that are joining us today. It's a very interesting topic, very current. It's becoming more and more important for companies and employees alike. I'm more than happy to share this space with all of you. I'm happy to lead the employment and labor practice in Venezuela for many years now. I've also been part of the regional or Latin American group or steering committee in our region, which I led during 2012 to 2017. And now I'm very proud to have Leticia as our leader currently of this wonderful group. So again, thanks everybody, welcome, and more than happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I am also delighted to welcome two speakers to share their practical insights into burnout. First, Laura Camacho McKenzie. Laura.
Hi, Leticia. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you. I have been working in the corporate world for almost 30 years. And in 2019, I experienced burnout. So I'm happy to share with you what was my experience and especially which were my learnings during this process.
Thank you, Laura. And last but not least, Juliana Garcia Castro. Hello, Juliana. Juliana, you are on mute.
Yes. Good morning. Hello, Leticia. Hello, Carlos, Laura, and those of you who are connected. I'm a medical practitioner. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm very excited to be a part of this panel because this is such an important topic, and anything we can do to help prevent mental illness through the access to information about our mental health, I am very welcome to participate, and hopefully we can all learn from this webinar today.
Thank you so much, Juliana. Thank you again, all panelists, for participating today. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Before we get started, I just wanted to provide you all with a quick overview of the agenda we have for today. So we'll start with a brief polling questions just to set the stage. Then we'll move to hear from Juliana Castro, who will approach the matter from a medical perspective, then hear from Laura Camacho and her personal story. After that, we'll briefly go over the legal framework in Latin America so that we can regroup on some of the lessons learned, followed by comments to the questions that may be submitted during our event. So next slide, please. To better understand the mindset and experience of our audience today, we would like to start with a very simple polling question. If we could have the polling question up, please. So the question is, have you seen an increase in burnout in your organization? And the potential answers are yes, no, and what's burnout? So if you could please just choose one of these options. We'll give a couple of seconds and then put the results back on the screen. Perfect. So we can see the vast majority, 80%, saying that they do have seen an increase in burnout. We do have a large percentage, 11%, with the question about what's burnout. And so this is very good because we will be able to discuss in much more detail the matter today. And congrats for those companies, those representing those companies that have not seen an increase in burnout. And the idea of the panel today is, while it's of course very important that the concept of burnout is recognized and understood, it is even more important that it is managed properly and ideally, to the most extent possible, avoided. And so along with the materials regarding the discussion today, we'll also be sending you suggestions in terms of practices and pitfalls so that we can all evolve in this sense. So thank you so much for answering the polling. With that, I will pass the floor to Juliana Castro, who will, again, as I said, take us through a more medically oriented review of the subject matter. Juliana, over to you.
Thank you, Leticia. So next slide, please. Our topic of today is burnout. Leticia did a brief definition, but I'd like to amplify it a little bit so we can really understand what it is. Now that we saw the polling answers, it's important for 100% at the end of this chat for us to be able to understand the definition. So burnout is a reaction to prolonged or chronic job stress, and it is characterized by three main dimensions: exhaustion, cynicism, and a feeling of reduced professional ability. So that was what we call inefficacy. Burnout may be accompanied by a variety of mental and physical health symptoms, which we will review. If left unaddressed, of course, burnout can make it very difficult for an individual to function well in their daily life and at work, of course. The term burnout is relatively new for us in psychology. It was first coined in 1974 by Herbert Freudenberger in his book, Burnout, The High Cost of High Achievement. He originally defined burnout as the extinction of motivation or incentive, especially where one's devotion to a cause, a relationship, or production fails to produce the desired results. As Leticia mentioned, burnout is now included in the 11th revision of International Classification of Diseases, ICD-11, as an occupational phenomenon. It is not classified as a medical condition. This is very important. Burnout refers specifically to the phenomenon in the occupational content and should not be applied to describe experiences in other areas of life. Next slide, please. we wanted to show you some statistics. These are Latin American statistics, and we will compare them to the worldwide statistics as well. So at this point, 81% of employees feel at risk of burnout. We can find that that's a large number, so it's an important population to be aware of. Next slide, please. The COVID pandemic, with its prolonged periods of lockdowns, social restrictions, and definitely a change in the work environment and how we communicated, created and exacerbated this risk. What we have found as the statistics is that 1 out of 2 people say that they are experiencing daily stress in the workplace. This is a precursor to what burnout can be. 76% said they were disengaged with their jobs. That was the feeling of unmotivation that we were speaking of. 20% say they're feeling anger and frustration, and 30% are feeling sad. In the parentheses, we see the difference between Latin America and the rest of the world. So feeling sad and frustration, 4 points more than worldwide, and feeling sad, 5 points more than worldwide. Next slide, please. One of the most difficult challenges created by the pandemic was, of course, the obligation to remote working. Some people were already doing it, but not in the scope that we're seeing now, because 40 to 60% of the workplace started working remotely, and that started blurring the lines between work and life. Every single sector of our economy, every profession, every business, every situation had to switch. And one of the things that we find is that 61% of these workers find it very difficult to unplug during non-working hours. 70% of the remote workers said they were also working on weekends because of their flexibility. And we find that there's a 250% fold repetition of the increased digital demands. So that definitely made a very big difference in what we were understood as our workplace environment. Next slide, please. A high stress job doesn't always lead to burnout. If stress is managed well, there may not be any illness at all. But some individuals and those in certain occupations are at higher risk than others. Heavy workload, certain personality characteristics, certain lifestyle challenges can increase the risk of burnout. The stress that contributes to occupational burnout, though, comes mainly from the job. But stress from other lifestyle situations can compound it. But we're going to be very emphatic that we want to look at what the job can do. Next slide, please. So employee burnout, hopefully workout, has 7 main causes in the job, on the job demands and the work culture. We have unreasonable time pressure and long working hours, unrealistic job demands and lack of role clarity, lack of communication and support from the managers, what people describe as disrespect, harassment, or bullying, mismatch between the workplace and personal values, a work culture that thrives on crisis, chaos, and pressure, and unmanageable workloads or hyperconnectivity. The 4 job resources that we see that usually help to avoid it, or if we can do something about it, we can make an impact on prevention, is autonomy and security, adequate pay with growth and learning opportunities, constructive feedback and coworker support, and the sense of fairness. Next slide, please. The personality triggers that most affect the possibility of burnout in our employees is a personality that is perfectionist and sometimes pessimist. And usually I hope you all at some point in biology class in high school learned about fight or flight reaction. So that the triggering of the fight or flight reaction is what we see in the difference in people who react to stressful situations and people who respond to stressful situations. When we react, a reaction is usually quick, it's tense, it's aggressive, it's executed with not much thought. It provokes a stronger reaction in the person we're talking to. It can perpetuate an ill feeling while accompanying this situation, that the stimulus that we're living through. So it's in the moment, it's triggered. It has to do with the fight or flight. It can feel uncomfortable. And one of the most important things is often the person who reacts that way regrets that reaction. Responding to stimulus, there's a space between the stimulus and the response, because that happens, so it happens slower because we're thinking. So we're processing what we want to do. We take more time to reflect. It's an intentional response. It's driven by our need to try and find a solution to the situation. It takes into consideration the well-being of others. It weighs out the long-term effects, and it stays within the person's core values and the organizations. So responding will help us not get to burnout. Reacting will. Next slide, please. The life triggers that we see that are either protect us or not are how our family life is, our personal values. If we use self-care habits like exercise, nutrition, hydration, a good sleep pattern, our socialization, the moment of our life cycle matters as well. The type of profession, we know there are professions that are more likely to end up in burnout, how our home environment is, if we have passions, interests outside of the job, and how we manage our leisure time. Next slide, please. So there are physical symptoms, there are emotional symptoms, and there's some workplace symptoms, which we call behavioral. So the physical symptoms that we see in people with burnout usually is headaches, migraines, stomach aches, intestinal problems, muscle and joint pain. That happens a lot. Stress, because of the chemicals it moves in our brain, causes inflammation. The emotional is the exhaustion. Exhaustion is the #1 symptom. And usually the difference between stress and burnout is that burnout has exhaustion as its #1 symptom. The person is tired, has no energy, is not motivated, it's unable to cope. They can't even do their day-to-day activities. And then we start seeing a lot of missed days of work. And in the workplace, we see reduced performance. Basically, we see the person maybe not looking like they don't care enough, not making deadlines, having difficulty problem solving and finding solutions to problems, and a lack of creativity. That's very frequent. Also, we see that our patients, I call them patients, the employees will grow more cynical and pessimistic, and they'll feel sometimes even numb and show no feelings whatsoever in the workplace. Next, please. So this is the slide I want to spend most time in, because I think it's important for everyone to understand the progress of the stages of burnout. In a Scientific American article from June 2006, Ulrich Kraft highlighted what he started to refer as the 12 stages of burnout, based on what psychologists Herbert Freudenberger and Gail North had described in 1974. As a clinician, it's very important for me to help us identify in what stage the employee is in, because every single stage has a different kind of intervention that we can do to prevent it from going to full burnout, which is the ideal. So the first stage is what we call the compulsion to prove oneself. The employee feels that they have to constantly demonstrate their worth. They'll work extra hours, they'll stay longer because they're not being as effective and productive, so they feel that need. They start working harder, is what we call work addicts. They don't want to take vacation. That's never a good sign if someone does not want to take vacation. They start neglecting their needs, not sleeping or eating well, lack of social interaction, which is so important. Displacement of conflicts. Displacement of conflicts is supremely important, because there might be an issue with another employee, with a coworker, but the employee doesn't react to that problem and takes it home, and then ends up having conflicts in other situations, in their family, with their friends, outside of the workplace. So they displace the conflict to another place where it doesn't belong either. And that only creates a lot more stress for everyone. Then we also have the fifth one, which is revision of values. Our core values, as you know, we have personal values, but we also have work values. And the work values of our office or of our company is something that we expect our employees to follow and to understand. But the employee stops feeling, when they're at this level, they stop feeling that the values are important and they start just saying, I need to produce, or I can't produce. So there's a lack there of a value system. Then comes the sixth one, which is the denial of the emerging problem. This point, number 6, normally happens when it might be another coworker, their boss, it might be HR that says, hey, let's have a talk. Do you need any help? And the denial of the emergent process problems is very, very big. They don't perceive themselves as having a problem. They actually start perceiving others as being stupid, lazy, demanding, undisciplined, and become very intolerant. And then comes withdrawal. The withdrawal in what we see in that stage is the person isolates themselves, no longer participates in the workplace environment, in other activities, and believes that the only thing that they can do is stay in front of their computer all day long. Also, sometimes at this point in number 7, we see people who start using alcohol, tobacco, or other substances to relieve from stress. Then odd behavioral changes is number 8, where mostly people who were actually kind and patient become unkind and impatient, where they start snapping back, start arriving late at a meeting, or things that are not characteristic of their personality. Then we have a phase that's called depersonalization. Depersonalization means that the person feels detached from others and even from themselves. They stop recognizing themselves, and they will actually say it that way. I don't know who I am anymore. And that's very, very important. This is a dangerous phase because it comes into the next one, which is the one of inner emptiness, where people feel that it's not even worth it anymore to continue trying. And that's very dangerous because it slides us down to what can be a clinical depression. Not everybody will get clinically depressed, but might be able to show some signs and symptoms of depression, which is feeling lost, insecure, feeling there's no future, that everything is dark and that they have no hope and that they are useless. When we hear that word of despair or uselessness, definitely in the clinical field, we worry. Because right after that, definitely burnout will come, where total mental and physical collapse ensues in the patient, and we need full-on medical attention at that point. So I think that this is an overview of what we have to understand and see in order to understand burnout. And now I invite Laura to share with us her personal experience, which is so important for us. We're so grateful that she's here today and willing to share her experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juliana. It's almost 3 a.m. in the morning. I have not been able to sleep already 6 weeks in a row. I don't know what's happening with me. I have been trying everything, really, really. I'm feeling anxious about the meeting I will have with my manager this afternoon. There are a lot of homeworks that I have not delivered yet, unfinished tasks. And you know what's the worst? That I don't care. I don't recognize myself. Hello, my name is Laura Camacho, and this is my story. The story of someone that, without knowing how, ended in a really difficult situation from a mental, emotional, and physical perspective, just trying to follow up a dream to become the great professional at all. Let's start by telling you about my family. I was born in a really nice family, but a very disciplined family. So from a really early stage, I was expected to be a good student, to be a great professional, to be a great sport person. I have to be perfect at all. And was that pretty difficult and complicated since I was dyslexic and obese when I was little. Suddenly, I started building my own career. From a very young age, I was exposed to a really difficult and toughened tasks. I accepted roles which I was not prepared for. And in the meantime, while I was doing this, I was building my family. I was raising teenagers, and of course, I was starting to take care of my parents. It was a really difficult situation since at one day I was taking all the decisions, not only at the office, but also from a personal and family perspective. Suddenly, I became like a superwoman, a Wonder Woman, in which I was taking all the decisions. I was a tough, disciplined, determined, and I reflected all that in my corporate environment. Back in 2010, I accepted a role, a really important role in a very tough tech company in Colombia. Besides having the challenge of opening the office and having a really demanding team and delivering all the results, I had, of course, to deal with the pressure of being perfect. I don't know if you know, but when you get to those positions, everyone expects you to be perfect. So I had to spend a lot of hours working, studying, trying to deal with the customers, trying to deliver all the results. I entered that rhythm without noticing. And without noticing, I also became really exhausted. And if that was not enough, when I was doing that, I had a career conversation with my manager. And as part of that career conversation, it was agreed that I have to make a leap, make a jump, and be exposed to more mature markets and be exposed to more international experiences. And that's how, without knowing at what time, I landed in Ireland, working for this company. I never imagined, to be super honest, what it meant to take that professional leap. Just to give you some examples, this is where basically a nightmare, like a little earthquake, started to happen in my life. Just to give you some ideas of what does meant, the first thing that I have to deal is that the hiring manager that hired me was no longer in the team. So it meant that when I arrived to a new country, to a new team, to a new unit, I have no support at all. But of course, I have to deliver all the results. It was like making changing a turbine on a flight where it was still flying. This causing me a lot of chronic stressors, not only from a personal, but also as work. To give you some examples of the personal ones, I have to deal with adaptive challenges. You know, remember I was moving my family, teenagers and a husband, to Ireland. I have to face the fact that our family roles were suddenly flipped. So my husband, that used to be a great and a successful professional, stayed at home. I ended there without any kind of supported work. I have to, that demanded a lot of work. And of course, I didn't have time to take care of myself. For me, failure was not an option. So I keep pushing. That meant that I was not able to socialize at all. And also I started like feeling homesick. On the work side, of course, as I mentioned before, I didn't have a manager, so I didn't have any kind of support. I have to learn really fast. I have to work a lot of work hours at night, on weekends. I didn't have any support network at all. I even have to face a language barrier. But remember, I was managing a business 10 times bigger. The team size was as well 10 times. And I have to deal that with not in my native language. There was a lot of plug and play demands. So there was no time to adjust. I just have to jump and deliver all the results. Doing this was pretty challenging. And I can say that at that time, my life was cracking. I was like cracking, everything was upside down. I didn't have control of anything I was doing. But I think the big earthquake came when I was informed that my mom was suffering cancer. So I didn't have to deal with all the professional and work demands, but also from a personal perspective, things got really, really complicated, really tough. And that's that moment when I had to raise my hand because I just felt I was drowning. I didn't have any control. I was exhausted. Things were not going well at the office. So I had to raise my hand and ask for help. The path to recovery was not easy at all. The first thing that I had to do was talk to my manager. And to be super honest, it was not easy at all. He was not prepared to have that conversation, neither do I. At that time, the company reacted really positively. What they offered was basically paid leave, 3 months paid leave, in order for me to take care of my health. But on the other side, they offered psychological support. I really appreciate that effort the company did to help me navigate this complexity. But to be super honest, it was pretty late. I was already in burnout. So I started reaching and doing some research, and I find out that in order to get out of that burnout, I have to deal with this from different perspectives, from a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual areas. I'm going to share you some things of the things I did. I really focus on my physical energy. So I make sure that I regain my sleep. Remember, I was not sleeping at all. I also understood that the way I was eating was not helpful for my energy and my mood. So I have to change all my nutrition. And also I understood that exercise was a powerful tool, but I have to find out something that didn't stress me and on the other way connected me with positive things. So that's how I became a professional hiker in the beautiful landscapes of Ireland. Other thing that was really powerful was becoming a volunteer. And I started working with elderly people, trying to fight loneliness with them. And the last thing that I did that was really powerful was like starting to visualize a life without the life I was living so far and resignify my possibilities. It was a really powerful exercise because instead of looking back, I started looking forward, and I discovered thousands of wonderful opportunities I had in front of me. And one of those was to let go the position I was. At that moment, I realized the life I was living and the conditions I was living by then was no longer valid for my purpose and for what I was expecting from life. So I decided to resign, got certified as a health coach, and decided to start working on burnout prevention worldwide. There's a lot of things that I learned so far in this journey, and the first one is from a personal perspective. The first thing is to embrace vulnerability. So it's okay not to be okay. And I know it's not an easy exercise, but it's the right way to go. No, you have to accept you are not okay. The second is that you have to take ownership. No one is going to take care of your own health but yourself. So it's important to take ownership. You have to stress to soften all those stress blows. It's important to stay grounded, to be present. It's important to find a way to work smarter, not longer. It's important to stay fit. So invest in exercising, in eating well, in sleeping, and recovering. The third thing is important to set limits and boundaries. The company will keep pushing. Everyone will keep pushing. You have to set limits and set those boundaries. Also, invest in those support networks. One of the things that really was difficult for me was losing that support network. So invest, be intentional, build those support networks wherever they are, and support your life with them. And also align your values and purposes. Many of the times you find yourself that the things you're doing are not longer what you want to do. So do an exercise and align those values. When you do that, making decisions will come natural and easier. And from an organizational perspective, it's important to celebrate vulnerability. Managers, let your people raise their hands without making them feel that they will lose something. It's important to protect that space, to build those emotional spaces so people can be wherever they are and express their feelings without any fear of their career progression or their team. Work on prevention. It's really important to, for example, invest in stress management programs, provide employee mental support and assistance, implement and adopt a disconnection policy and make it part of your culture, train managers on work stressors, invest in self-care programs, nutrition, sleep. Remember that people are people and need to be well in order to perform, foster a culture of respect, and finally implement and clear a fair performance management process. One of the things that generate more stress is the fact that people don't believe or feel that the processes internally are fair. And finally, empower your employees. They need to feel they have control of their careers within the organization. Make sure that they have the adequate resources to do their job. Implement flexibility policies. Everyone needs some flexibility in order to deal with all the responsibilities they have. Engage those employees in decision-making and make them crafters of their own jobs. Lastly, but not less important, set the tone, lead by example. Things will not change within the organization if we, as decision makers and managers, don't lead by example. Take your time. Take time to take care of yourself, set boundaries, and make sure that every decision you make within the organization is a decision based not only on progression, but it also from individual self-care. So with this, I just wanted to thank you and send this next time to Leticia. Thank you, Leticia.
Thank you so much, Laura and Juliana. Juliana, you shed a lot of light on burnout and how to look out for it. The slide with the different steps to consider was very, very important to better understand this entire process. And Laura, thank you so much for trusting all of us to share your amazing personal experience. I am sure you will be a positive reference and an inspiration for many listening in today. So now focusing a bit more on the legal related aspects of this discussion, which Carlos and I hope will keep you as engaged as the first part of this session. I'll turn over to you, Carlos, for us to cover a bit about what are we seeing, and can you please comment about how is employee mental health being protected across the region in Latin America?
Yes, thank you, Leticia. That's a very important question for all of our audience here. The protection of mental health in the Latin American legislation really varies from one country to another. We cannot say it's homogeneous or it's the same in all countries. However, we do see some trends that might be seen as common in many jurisdictions within the region. One of them is that some jurisdictions do require employers to guarantee a work environment that's conducive to the maintenance of a good mental health among the workplace, and to monitor the factors and conditions of work so that psychological risks are reduced or are maintained at healthy levels. So that's an obligation that some legislations do provide in the region. Another one that's very important is that if employers fail to comply with those obligations, in some countries, employers may be imposed sanctions, such as fines, which are one of the most common ones. In some legislations, we even see criminal liability. It is the case, for example, in Venezuela, where in certain very serious breaches of the obligations by the employer's representatives may even go to jail potentially. It's not something that you see every day. Cases like that are not so common, but the risk exists in the legislation in that regard. Another important way of protecting employees' mental health is that whenever there is disability or inability to work during some periods due to mental illness, many legislations do guarantee the employees employment relationship or work. That is, that the employer may not dismiss the employee. The employee becomes a protected individual in the workplace, so that no dismissal may take place unless there is just cause and some procedures are followed. Many legislations do provide for some type of compensation for the employee that's ill and that, again, is disabled to temporarily attend work. And then finally, the employer may be liable even civilly or financially in case the employer fails to comply with some of the obligations that the employer has in this area. So the bottom line is that the employers must really find out what are the obligations, to the extent they don't know them all, that apply to each company in each country, and make sure that they comply with every single aspect of those laws in order to ensure that no liability potentially could attach to the employer due to cases of mental health, burnout, or other occupational diseases.
Thank you, Carlos. And let's now try to reframe the discussion considering the pandemic. Has the pandemic driven challenges in this regard throughout our region?
Definitely it has. Definitely it has. As Juliana mentioned at the beginning, the lockdowns, for example, affected all individuals one way or another. Some were able to better cope, others had more difficult time coping with that. So definitely the pandemic changed our lives. I remember that one speaker summarized it very nicely at the very beginning of the pandemic when the individuals mentioned that before the pandemic, we used to have our work in the workplace, our entertainment in the entertainment places outside of our home, and our family life at home. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic changed it all, and the three main aspects of individuals' activities or a sphere of relationships concentrated into one single place, which is your home. So all of a sudden, you had to entertain yourself in the home, you had to work at home, and any social interaction was mostly digital, or virtual. So that sudden change definitely created a significant impact for both workers and employers, and definitely caused an aggravation, if you will, of the potential risk of experiencing burnout or experiencing mental health issues. Issues such as managing the workload at home, dividing or making or drawing the line between your personal life and your work life while you were working remotely from home. Those issues definitely contributed to some cases to the increase of this problem.
And what about the number of cases in the region? How is that playing out? Was there a significant increase of burnout?
Overall, it has increased. Definitely, that's what the polls and the different research that has been made and surveys have found. Interestingly enough, at the beginning of this very seminar, most of our audience concluded that they've seen an increase or significant cases of burnout, or at least potential cases of burnout. So definitely it's happened. Perhaps in a couple of countries, we have not seen that necessarily happen, but perhaps that's primarily for certain factors and cultural reasons that we will touch upon later. But overall in the region, we have seen an increase in cases of burnout.
And Carlos, one final question to you before we go to our second polling. What are the main challenges we have today to protect the mental health of the workforce in Latin America?
Well, definitely there are many, especially because remote working continues. Sometimes companies have switched to hybrid work, but remote work continues to be a component. We have not been out of the pandemic yet, even though for some it has improved. The pandemic is still there. So definitely we continue to have important challenges such as the environment, for example, the external environment. Definitely that affects a lot the ability for employers and employees alike to try to cope with this situation. Employees sometimes voluntarily decide to work longer and longer hours. And of course, without intending to become ill, they may increase the risk of becoming ill or having mental issues due to that decision that sometimes they take. Culturally, we also have challenges in some countries where mental health issues are not really widely accepted as something that's okay. As Laura mentioned, accepting vulnerability that is seen not necessarily so well, so to put it nicely, in some countries. So employees and employers alike sometimes shy away from even talking about mental health issues. So it's still a taboo, to so to speak, in some cultures and in some locations. So that's definitely a very important challenge. The difficulty to track work hours when the employees are working remotely, that's another important challenge. That difficulty sometimes increases the pressure that employees experience from management to deliver, because management may not necessarily be aware of how many hours they have already devoted to the work, and they may feel that additional hours are needed when actually that might not necessarily be the case. So definitely we do have very important challenges, and it is important for companies to address those in the most constructive way possible, so that the risk of mental health issues and burnout are reduced.
Thank you, Carlos. So with that, I'll please ask for the next polling to come up and let you please take the lead on that, Carlos.
Yes, thank you so much, Leticia. So we have our second polling question of the day today. And we would like you to answer as specifically as you can. As you can see, you will see a lot of different answers. So the question is, how is your company protecting your employees' mental health at this time? And this is a multiple choice question. So we have the following choices. Are you training on mental health awareness? Is that what your company is doing? Is your company promoting the engagement of workers in certain activities, such as exercise programs, team building, etc.? Third, is the company engaging in regular casual catch-ups with employees, for example, online calls, Zoom meetings with everybody gathered together to share what has been done and so forth in a relaxing atmosphere? Is that what your company is doing? Fourth, company-sponsored employee assistance programs, guidance, or counseling, where, for example, typically employees have a line or a phone line where they can call, confidentiality is guaranteed and assured, and employees can actually relate what their problems are and get some counseling from professionals that are experienced and dedicated to this subject, or all of the above, or none of the above. So we'll have a few seconds for you to reflect on this and answer, so that we can get a sense of what companies are doing in this area. Thank you so much for your participation. Okay, here are the results. Interesting. The answer seems to be split among the different factors. Some companies are definitely more engaged in training, 39%. Others, or maybe the same companies that answer on the 39% are also providing employee assistance programs, about 38%. Next to that, companies are engaging in certain activities outside of work hours, such as exercise programs and the like. Other companies are also doing Zoom or online calls in a more relaxing atmosphere with employees in an attempt to protect their mental health as well. And some companies, interestingly enough, are doing everything that's mentioned there, so 16%. And then other companies, hopefully it's the minority, only 15% are doing nothing at the moment. So definitely an encouragement there to try and implement some programs and maybe get some guidance as to this, because as you have seen, this is a very prevailing problem right now, not only in our region, but in the world, but certainly in our region. It seems to be a little bit worse. If you saw the comparison that Juliana shared in her presentation between Latin America and the world, where we've seen to be a few points above the world statistics when it comes to some of these issues. So definitely a good word of advice for those who are not doing anything at this time, perhaps to consider implementing some of these actions. So thank you very much for sharing this. It's very interesting to see the results. And now I think that I will turn the microphone to my friend Leticia for her to try to provide us with some conclusions and lessons learned based on all of the prior presentations. And then finally, we're going to go to a very brief Q&A session where hopefully we'll be able to answer some of the questions that you have already been posing in the chat. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Carlos. And just one quick reminder to everyone, we will be circulating the slide deck, the recording of this session, as well as some additional materials we have worked on, providing general instructions to employers to mitigate the risk of burnout. So you'll all be receiving these materials in the emails that you use to register to attend the session today. If we could move to the next slide, please. We just wanted, before we move to the final part of our event, we wanted to share a very brief summary of the best practices we have heard today from a specialist, from someone who suffered the issue individually, as well as from a legal perspective. How can we adopt best practices to protect the mental health of the workforce in Latin America? So here are only some suggested actions, which are, of course, not exhaustive, but they include complying with the legal obligations to protect employees' mental health, provide adequate resources to help address any mental health issues that might arise, have training and education on the matter, always carefully monitor the mandatory leaves, the vacation, the holiday leaves, and even consider providing more flexible work patterns, especially in this new normal that we are all living, that Carlos so well described. Increase employee engagement through some social interaction now that the pandemic seems to be more under control in many jurisdictions. And finally, provide employee guidance on digital behavior, including the right to disconnect. This is something that, even though we don't have a firm obligation in many jurisdictions, it's for sure a very important best practice at this time. So Carlos, with that, now over to you to moderate our Q&A session and end our webinar today. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Leticia. So we do have some questions from the audience. The first question is, how do you deal with someone that is experiencing burnout? Juliana, can you address that?
Sure, thank you very much. I want to make emphasis on mental health is and always has been as important as physical health. The fact of what Carlos was saying, stigma and sometimes taboo about it, it's more about mental illness. So I think it's very important post-pandemic for us never to lose sight of mental health. The pandemic brought it into the forefront, and it's so important because that's exactly what we have to be doing. The best way to intervene with our employees is creating an environment where mental health is equally as important as their physical health. So if we, at any stage of any symptom, of any situation that the person or the employee is expressing, especially for burnout, the lack of enthusiasm, the lack of motivation, and that sensation of exhaustion, it's extremely important to intervene immediately with the programs that each business might have already implemented, but also having a go-to psychotherapist, psychologist, psychiatrist in the case of someone who has underlying mental health issues. It's very important to quickly seek help and an evaluation. An evaluation doesn't mean that we have an illness, but the evaluation can prevent an illness from becoming something we will later regret.
Thank you so much, Juliana. We have another question here that I would say is a little bit more from the legal side. Perhaps you can answer, Leticia. The question is, companies have an active mental health program with some specific benefits during the pandemic, but what about after the pandemic? Can we say that these actions will no longer be required? So in other words, they are asking if they should eliminate these programs after the pandemic is over. What do you suggest?
Yes, after everything that we've heard today and realizing that most likely the workplace as we knew it before the pandemic might never be a reality again, I would say that more than ever, it's important to keep those programs. And even though some of those programs might be required locally, for instance, based on collective bargaining agreements, or even existing company policies created during the pandemic, even if they are not a statutory obligation, I think for everything that we have heard from both Juliana, Laura, as well as Carlos, and considering again the fact that the World Health Organization has formally included burnout as an occupational phenomenon, so it is work related, more and more this should be a topic of concern for the companies. I think mental health and the concern with mental health, treating it just as importantly as physical health, which is something that Juliana has very well stressed, is something that, in my view, came to stay. So from a legal perspective, I would not recommend you to discontinue the programs created during the pandemic. Of course, depending on the nature of such programs, it might make sense to adjust them, to tweak them, but discontinue, I wouldn't advise that. Back to you, Carlos.
I definitely agree with that, Leticia, totally. So I have a question for Laura here from the audience. Laura, could you elaborate more on the vulnerability aspect of the equation? How can companies and individuals alike approach this concept, which seems to be very important for dealing and preventing burnout?
Yes, I think, thank you for the question, because I think it was like the most important element of me developing burnout. You know, when you are not able to speak up and to show and bring yourself to work, these things happen. What can organizations do, and especially managers? I think the manager plays a really important role here in order to open that space, that safe space for the person to express whatever emotions are experiencing. Remember that people besides work and being professional are people with demands and with a lot of things going on in their lives. So keep really close to your people, let them express their feelings without any kind of, without qualifying them, no, because, you know, feelings are not really personal. And I think there's a huge opportunity for managers to demonstrate their vulnerability as well with their direct reports. You know, show yourselves as humans and not only as employees within the organization. By doing this, you just show people that it's okay not to be okay, and address that in a really controlled and safe environment for the people. Those are like my recommendation in terms of making this part of the culture and not having consequences because of doing that.
Thank you so much, Laura. I think that was very insightful, very, very interesting. Leticia, another question from the legal side for you. Is the challenge to protect mental health part of corporate responsibility?
For sure it is. More and more mental health is being compared to physical health, including in local statutes. So just like there is a general employer obligation to provide a safe workplace with respect to physical health, this concept is being more and more applied to mental health as well. Carlos, I'll just deliver back to you to close the event. I know we are right on time.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Leticia. So to the extent we've left any questions unanswered, more than happy to answer offline. You can write to any of us, any of the panelists, and we'll be more than happy to address those questions to you very quickly over the email, for instance, or in a quick phone call. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic webinar. Very, very enthusiastic audience, lots of questions. And I hope that you got some interesting points back for your companies to improve or work upon in order to try to limit or avoid exposure in this very important topic. And more importantly, even to try to help your employees remain healthy among these difficult times. So thanks everyone for joining, and see you in our future webinars. We'll keep doing some of these periodically, so to keep you informed of what's happening and to have a forum for discussion of these important ideas. So you will be hearing from us in the near future about more topics to come. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.